When we talked about higher order functions, one thing that made a function higher order is if it returned a function. Combining that feature with closure, we have a pretty powerful construct, because suddenly we can return a function from a function, and that returned function will have access to the scope of the original function. Any variable set up, any functions declared, it will have access to all of those. And one of the benefits of that is we did not have to put any of those variables or functions on the global scope in order to make them accessible. In a sense, they are private. They can only be accessed by things in its scope. And the return function can continue to act on them and use them. Let's look at an example. All right, now notice the number of things we have declared here. We have a variable, we have 3 functions, and then we have this function, which is created by composing the 3 functions previous to it. So we have quite a bit that's declared here and is on the global space. Well, using this idea that we just talked about, let's put it all inside a function and then have it return a function that will do this same thing. All right, so let's just call this, we'll just call it get function for simplicity's sake. And I'm going to take this and cut that out, and then let's go ahead and indent all of this down here. Add the closing curly brace, and so there's our function. We've got that set up, but now we need to return a function. So we can do that by simply replacing this part here with return, and it's going to return this function here. Now, to assign that to multiply by 5 and so on, we can declare this variable, and we can set it equal to this function we've just created, get function, so that when this function completes, the get function completes, it's going to return a function, and that's going to be placed in multiply by 5 and display. All right, now this function here, even though this function above it is completely finished, it's removed from the stack, it's going to have access to this and this and this and the num1 variable. It's going to have access to all of that. That's going to be available to it. And then if we change the signature of this, so if we're just passing in one number, let's say n2, and then down here we use num1 from this declared previously, now this is always going to multiply by 5 and something else, whatever is passed in. So that will make it a multiply by 5 and display, which is going to be returned here. And now we're only passing in one number like this. Now let's go ahead and save this, and we'll take a look at it. Open up the console here, and we should have access to multiply by 5 and display. And let's pass in 6, and that gives us back 30. It formats it, puts the punctuation after it. Anyway, it does all those other things that were a part of that function. This function here, the get function. So it has access to all of those. Now, something else we could do to even make this better is we could use num1 up here. We could get rid of the declaration here and just have it as a parameter. Now, when we create the multiply by 5 and display function, we pass in 5. But we can also create multiply by, let's do 10 and display. Suddenly this is a lot more flexible. We just pass in 10 there. So now we have 2 functions that have been created from this. And each one of these have access to everything that's a part of the lexical scope of this function that's returned. And so it becomes very powerful that way. So let's just check those out. Let's do our multiply by 5. Let's do 7 this time. So that's still working for us. And now we also have a multiply by 10. Let's do 7 on this one as well. So we've got two functions now that have access to everything that's inside of this, the scope of the getFunction function, even though that function is no longer running. The JavaScript engine is smart enough to know that there could be something that still references these, so it creates closure over that. Those are maintained in memory, and because of closure, we're able to access them. Now, let me show you something else we can do just as we're dealing with higher order functions here and closure. Let me go ahead and go to the console, and I'm going to call getFunction, and I'm going to pass in 20 this time. Now, what is that going to return? Well, it's going to return a function, as we can see here. Now, since that is returning a function, I could do something like this. Since a function is being returned, I could immediately invoke it. The next set of parentheses will invoke the function that's being returned, and I'll pass in 5, and so that should equal 100. Now we've got a function. If we just use getFunction this way, we've got a function where we can multiply any two numbers and display them. Now what I'm trying to show you here is just the flexibility because of the higher order function, because of the closure that has been created. And that's why I say it's a powerful construct in JavaScript, and one that we need to be familiar with and we need to be able to use. All right, let's move on to the next topic.